Well, turning now to the latest swing in a fight over who will be the next Texas House Speaker, with an East Texas lawmaker now accusing the state GOP chair of violating several ethics rules, saying he illegally threatened and intimidated elected officials.
His response was, "Don't you dare threaten me."
Days after the state GOP chair and the attorney general came to Tyler threatening lawmakers, State Rep Cody Harris of Palestine has filed a complaint with the Texas Ethics Commission. He accuses Chairman Abraham George of breaking the rules by threatening to send mailers and censure lawmakers like him who support Dustin Burrows as the next House Speaker.
You know, when we have Republicans who goes out there and join with the Democrats instead of joining with the Republicans, we are not doing the right thing.
George and other Republicans are backing State Rep David Cook as the next Speaker, setting up a political standoff with Lubbock Rep Dustin Burrows, who is relying on bipartisan support, something the GOP is using against several East Texas lawmakers, including Harris. Harris writes online, as the saying goes, never negotiate with terrorists or toddlers. And that now includes Texas GOP Chairman George Abraham and his puppet masters. George has responded to Harris's ethics complaint, saying, "I hope the Texas Ethics Commission will do the right thing and reject this baseless complaint." Attorney General Ken Paxton has also threatened lawmakers like Harris with a primary opponent if they do not vote for Cook. It's the same tactic Paxton used against lawmakers who voted to impeach him.